Sunday, the 17th of May, 2026, began like any other tense day in a region already stretched to its limits. No one expected calm, no one expected restraint. Another missile exchange, another flashpoint near the Strait of Hormuz, another challenge to already fragile ceasefire arrangements all seemed entirely possible. What almost no one anticipated was this. A drone struck a nuclear power facility, not a military installation, not an airfield, not an oil processing site. A civilian nuclear power station. The target was the Baraka nuclear energy plant, positioned in Abu Dhabi's Al Dhafra region, roughly 225 kilometers west of the UAE capital. This is no ordinary industrial complex. Built at a cost of $20 billion, it produces close to 25% of the United Arab Emirates' electrical output. That was the site hit earlier this morning. The sheer fact that diplomatic channels are still being discussed after an incident of this scale is astonishing. Here is what unfolded. 3 unmanned aerial vehicles crossed into UAE airspace from the western frontier during the morning hours. Defensive systems successfully destroyed 2 before impact. A third slipped through the screen and struck an electrical generator located beyond the plant's inner security ring, igniting a fire. Emergency crews contained the blaze. The International Atomic Energy Agency later confirmed that the impact caused a fire involving an external electrical generator, and that 1 reactor briefly shifted to emergency diesel backup power. The agency also stated all 4 reactor units remain operational. UAE nuclear authorities posted on X that safety systems were untouched. Core plant functions continued uninterrupted. There were no injuries, no radiological leak, no damage to reactor integrity. Yet anyone dismissing this as minor is missing the scale of what has happened. Baraka is responsible for producing approximately 40 terawatt-hours of low-carbon electricity every year. That output supplies around 1/4 of total UAE electricity demand, equivalent to the yearly national power consumption of Switzerland. Its operations prevent roughly 22.4 million tons of carbon emissions annually. That reduction equals removing 4.8 million vehicles from global roads. This is not symbolic infrastructure. It is a central pillar of the Emirates' civilian power network, developed through South Korean engineering expertise and commissioned in phases, with the 4th and final reactor entering commercial service during 2024. Launching an attack against such a facility during an active ceasefire crosses a boundary that even wartime adversaries have historically avoided. There are reasons for that. International legal protections surrounding civilian nuclear sites exist because consequences extend beyond immediate destruction. A single catastrophic failure can contaminate entire regions for generations. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi reacted within hours, expressing grave concern and emphasizing that military actions placing nuclear safety at risk are unacceptable. Those were not routine diplomatic remarks. That was the world's chief nuclear watchdog issuing a rapid and unmistakable warning. The UAE's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed, condemned what he described as a treacherous terrorist strike. He called the attack on peaceful nuclear infrastructure a direct violation of international law, the United Nations Charter, and humanitarian principles. Qatar's response was equally severe, labeling the incident a blatant breach and a direct threat to regional stability, stating it had crossed every red line. The language changed almost instantly across the Gulf. That shift matters. It reveals that regional calculations are changing. What has received less attention is Abu Dhabi's careful decision not to publicly assign blame. Official UAE statements stopped short of explicitly naming Iran. That restraint was deliberate. When a state avoids immediate attribution after an attack of this magnitude, it usually means evidence is still being weighed against strategic timing. Trajectory analysis, flight patterns, intelligence intercepts, and operational context are all being assessed before a formal declaration. Still, the broader pattern is difficult to ignore. Since the 28th of February, the UAE has faced repeated drone and missile pressure following the opening phases of United States and Israeli operations against Iran. A ceasefire announced between Washington and Tehran on the 8th of April briefly reduced hostilities. Earlier this month, drone strikes resumed. That pattern paints a deeply concerning picture. This morning's strike is especially significant because it occurred while ceasefire mechanisms remain nominally active, while negotiations between Washington and Tehran are reportedly stalled, and while the United States has more than 15,000 military personnel, plus over 100 aircraft positioned throughout the theater under Operation Project Freedom. On the same Sunday morning, President Donald Trump held a phone conversation with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu focused on Iran. Later, Netanyahu told his cabinet that Israel remained fully alert and prepared for every possible scenario. When Washington and Jerusalem are discussing Iran at the exact moment a nuclear power station is hit, events are no longer static. A new phase is emerging. To understand what comes next, it is critical to understand what the Emirates have already endured. This was not an isolated event. Since the conflict began on the 28th of February, Gulf states have faced sustained pressure from repeated missile and drone assaults. Media coverage has often underplayed the scale. The conditional ceasefire, reached on the 8th of April, temporarily reduced direct confrontation for several weeks. Then attacks resumed. That matters because it suggests the ceasefire was not used to de-escalate. It was used to regroup. And now, within that same ceasefire window, a drone has reached a civilian nuclear facility. The UAE's defensive shield has been operating at punishing tempo for weeks. Thiad batteries and Patriot systems have remained active continuously, intercepting ballistic threats, cruise missiles, and drone swarms at rates that would have seemed extraordinary only 18 months ago. There is a wider pattern here. During Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, nuclear infrastructure increasingly entered operational targeting discussions. A similar trend has now surfaced in this regional conflict. Iran has repeatedly claimed that its own Bushehr nuclear plant faced hostile actions, though those incidents caused neither structural compromise nor radiological release. The symbolism is unmistakable. By targeting Baraka, the message is strategic. This was not a navigation error. This was deliberate signaling directed toward the UAE, the United States, and the wider international system. The signal has been received. The only remaining question is how the response will take shape. And the answer may already be visible over the Strait of Hormuz. Operation Project Freedom, the United States campaign designed to restore maritime transit through the strait, had already been intensifying before this morning's incident. The strike on Baraka did not initiate escalation. It accelerated one already underway. On the 4th of May, 2026, U.S. Central Command formally launched Project Freedom after Iran's effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz following the opening strikes of the conflict. Before hostilities, approximately 110 to 120 vessels crossed the strait daily. That volume collapsed to fewer than 10 transits each day. Some days recorded none. Throughput dropped below 10% of normal levels. Nearly 2,000 ships and around 20,000 seafarers have been affected. This is not logistical inconvenience. It is a deliberately imposed global economic choke point. Brent crude has climbed beyond $114 per barrel this May, compared with approximately $71 on the 27th of February, the day before war erupted. Each day the strait remains constrained adds billions in economic pressure. Each passing day increases Washington's incentive to act. CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper described Project Freedom as inherently defensive. Its force package includes ballistic missile defense destroyers, more than 100 air and maritime platforms, multi-domain unmanned systems operating above and below the waterline, and 15,000 deployed personnel. That is already formidable. But the composition of those aircraft reveals something more important. F-16 fighters are confirmed among the deployed force. That matters because the F-16 CKJ variant is specifically optimized for suppression of enemy air defenses. Its mission is straightforward. Find hostile surface-to-air systems, track them, destroy them before strike aircraft move in. And when those aircraft are positioned over contested zones, planners are not simply patrolling. They are shaping a battle space. They are preparing a strike architecture. Alongside them are F-15 aircraft, F-35 stealth platforms, EA-18G Growlers for electronic warfare, and rotary wing assets including AH-64 Apache and MH-60 helicopters. Those helicopters have already demonstrated effectiveness against Iranian drone swarms. The Growler deserves special attention. It is not a conventional fighter. It exists to blind radar networks, jam communications, and dismantle air defense coherence before offensive operations begin. That is the kind of capability positioned when commanders are preparing options far beyond passive defense. This morning's strike may have targeted only an electrical generator. Its political and military impact reaches much further. The fire at Baraka may already have ignited something far larger. The aircraft, now circling above this theater, are not there merely to show presence. Their purpose is far more deliberate. This is an electronic warfare platform built for one mission above all else, to erase an adversary's ability to see, coordinate, and respond. Its systems are engineered to overwhelm radar arrays, disrupt command transmissions, and cripple integrated air defense structures. Its deployment tells us something unmistakable. The United States is already constructing a complete electronic map of Iranian defensive architecture. Every radar pulse, every missile battery data exchange, every command frequency and encrypted signal moving through Iran's military networks is being captured, identified, and cataloged. That is not routine surveillance. That is operational groundwork. And layered into this intelligence framework is one of the most critical assets in the American arsenal, the RC-135 Rivet Joint. This modified Boeing 707 platform, carrying a crew of roughly 35 signals intelligence specialists, functions as the central processing hub for the targeting ecosystem now unfolding across the region. Operating at 40,000 foot, it can gather, classify, and geolocate electromagnetic activity from Iranian drone launch sites, ballistic missile positions, radar arrays, and command centers spanning the entire battlespace. Every Shahed launch signature, every surface-to-air radar activation, every IRGC command net that suddenly lights up, all of it is logged, categorized, and immediately integrated into the targeting matrix. The rivet joint never releases a weapon. Yet without it, none of the strike chain that follows could function. It creates the digital battlefield map every other asset depends on. Working alongside it is the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, launched from carrier decks and providing airborne command and warning capability that can monitor more than 2,000 simultaneous tracks at ranges beyond 300 nautical mile. That is not passive observation. That is battlespace dominance. Meanwhile, the USS Amphibious Ready Group continues enforcing the blockade throughout the Arabian Sea, while deployment extensions for 2 aircraft carriers have remained in place as operational pressure has stayed elevated. 2 carrier strike groups operating in one theater at the same time is not normal force rotation. It is strategic signaling. It communicates readiness. CENTCOM confirmed on Sunday that American forces have now redirected 81 commercial vessels and disabled 4 since blockade enforcement operations against Iran began on the 13th of April. Pause there. 81 ships redirected, 4 disabled. This blockade is not symbolic theater. It is a functioning economic chokehold. Its purpose is straightforward: cut the oil revenues sustaining the IRGC, restrict funding for drone production, and weaken the financial channels supporting every Shahed launch toward Emirati territory. Tehran understands exactly what this pressure means, and this morning's strike against Baraka appears in part to be an answer. When direct military breakthrough becomes impossible, escalation often shifts toward targets with psychological impact, far beyond immediate tactical value. A headline about a nuclear facility resonates differently than one about a refinery. Iran knows this. Tehran understands information warfare just as clearly as kinetic warfare. Yet what has received far too little attention is that this morning's attack may be only one visible piece of a much deeper shadow conflict. For weeks, beneath public headlines, a quieter war has reportedly been unfolding. Multiple outlets, including the Wall Street Journal and the Telegraph, have reported that the UAE conducted covert air operations against Iranian targets. Among those alleged strikes was an attack on the Lavin oil refinery in the Persian Gulf, one of Iran's 4 largest export hubs. According to those reports, Western-built fighter aircraft and drones were used, knocking the facility offline and triggering a massive fire. Abu Dhabi has offered no public confirmation. Iran, however, immediately labeled the event an enemy strike and answered with retaliatory missile launches and drone barge attacks targeting Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Kuwait. Consider what that implies. Publicly, the UAE has presented itself as measured and restrained. Privately, if these reports are accurate, it has been conducting offensive operations deep into Iranian energy infrastructure while simultaneously defending its own skies against continuous missile and drone assault. That is not passive endurance. That is a 2-layered war effort, one visible, one concealed. To many analysts, the Baraka strike looks increasingly like Tehran's response to those covert attacks on Lavon Island, a message delivered through fire, a warning placed directly at Abu Dhabi's doorstep. The question now is whether the response from Abu Dhabi, Washington, and Tel Aviv will be written in the same language. 2 individuals familiar with current coordination efforts, including an Israeli military officer, have confirmed that Israel is actively consulting with the United States regarding potential renewed strike operations. They spoke anonymously due to the classified nature of those preparations. At nearly the same moment, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu informed his cabinet that Israel stands ready for any scenario. When military officials allow such details to surface publicly on the same morning a nuclear facility is struck, the signal is intentional. Someone wants Tehran to understand the message. The opportunity for de-escalation is narrowing. Time is running short. But before projecting what the next 72 hours may bring, it is essential to understand Iran's remaining military capability. Underestimating Tehran at this stage would be a serious analytical mistake. This is not a collapsing force, lashing out blindly. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force, the IRGC-ASF, has spent 4 decades building a highly asymmetric military architecture specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in conventionally superior opponents. They studied American doctrine. They examined its strengths. Then they engineered systems built not to match it directly, but to exploit its vulnerabilities. That architecture explains why this morning's strike unfolded the way it did. At the center of Iran's current offensive capability sits the Shahed 136 loitering munition. This is almost certainly the system that struck the Baraka generator. It is a one-way kamikaze platform with an estimated reach of approximately 1,000 nautical mile and carries a 50-kilogram warhead. Its operational design emphasizes low-altitude penetration to slip beneath radar coverage. It is not silent. Footage from earlier attacks captured the unmistakable sound. A low buzzing tone witnesses often compare to a large lawnmower overhead. But stealth is not the point. Volume is. Iran does not launch one Shahed. It launches dozens simultaneously. This forces defending systems into rapid engagement decisions under immense operational strain. And here, the economics become decisive. A single Shahed, 136, costs roughly $25,000 to produce. Intercepting it with advanced surface-to-air systems costs several times more. Scale that exchange across hundreds of launches, and the arithmetic becomes punishing. Defensive stockpiles erode faster than they can be replenished. This cost imbalance is precisely why the IRGCSF has invested so heavily in drone warfare across the last decade. And it explains why, even after President Donald Trump described Iran's navy as annihilated and resting at the bottom of the sea following strikes on more than 8,000 Iranian military targets, including 130 naval vessels, Tehran still retains the ability to project force 225 kilometers inside UAE territory. The drone threat did not disappear with naval losses. It dispersed. It moved underground into hardened launch complexes, mobile road-based systems, and decentralized launch teams requiring neither runways nor traditional pilot infrastructure. That was always the design, and it is working. But drones represent only half the equation. Iran's Fateh 110 family of road mobile precision ballistic missiles remains active. These systems carry baseline ranges between 150 and 200 nautical mile, though Tehran has demonstrated longer reach variants throughout this conflict. Their greatest strength lies in mobility. They do not remain fixed. They relocate constantly. They disappear into tunnel systems, beneath bridges, and within civilian transportation corridors. The RC-135 and broader targeting architecture supporting Project Freedom have been methodically working to identify these systems. Still, Iran's vast geography and decentralized launch doctrine make total suppression extraordinarily difficult. Destroy one battery. 3 others move before the next strike window opens. What has shifted significantly since the 28th of February is the weakening of Iran's integrated defensive shield. In the opening stages of the conflict, American forces employed 5,000-pound bunker-buster munitions against hardened anti-ship cruise missile complexes along the Strait of Hormuz. 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels were also sunk while Tehran actively seeded the strait. That systematic dismantling of Iran's outer defensive belt explains why elevated F-16 CJ patrols matter so much now. Tehran has spent each week of ceasefire rebuilding, reloading, repositioning. The Wild Weasel mission profile exists precisely to locate these reconstructed nodes and eliminate them before larger strike packages penetrate Iranian airspace. The increased sortie tempo now visible across CENTCOM channels is not routine activity, it is preparation. And here is perhaps the most revealing detail of all. Iranian state-linked media identified Baraka as a possible target as early as March 2026, specifically citing it in retaliation scenarios tied to American actions near Karg Island in the Strait of Hormuz. This morning's strike was not improvised. It was pre-planned, telegraphed, then executed. That tells us something critical about current IRGC strategy. This is not random retaliation, it is deliberate escalation, each step carefully calculated to impose political and psychological cost, while forcing Washington and Abu Dhabi into increasingly difficult choices. Strike back and assume responsibility for breaking ceasefire arrangements. Absorb the hit and project weakness. That is the trap. Energy Secretary Chris Wright, speaking on CBS Face the Nation, articulated Washington's stated objective with unusual bluntness. He declared that the United States will restore unrestricted maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz and bring Iran's nuclear program to an end. He added that while the precise route remains uncertain, the destination is clear. He also confirmed that Tehran currently possesses nearly 1,000 pounds of uranium enriched to 60%. That level is perilously close to weapons grade and sits far beyond any legitimate civilian requirement. That number matters, 1,000 pounds. It is the strategic shadow hanging over every operational development now unfolding. The strike on Baraka, the F-16 CJ patrols, the carrier group stationed offshore. Every piece connects back to that single figure. And that is what makes this moment so dangerous. This confrontation is no longer centered solely on control of the Strait of Hormuz. At its core, the United States and Israel are now locked in a race against time, one aimed at determining whether Iran reaches the nuclear threshold before the military window to prevent it disappears. That is why Benjamin Netanyahu's remarks this morning carried such extraordinary significance. Speaking before his cabinet, while reports of the UAE nuclear facility strike were still dominating headlines worldwide, he stated that Israel's eyes remain fully open and that the country stands prepared for every possible contingency. That is not the language of a leader convinced a ceasefire is functioning. That is the language of someone measuring time in narrowing increments, and everyone seated around that cabinet table understands the same reality. The timeline agreed upon by Washington and Jerusalem did not pause simply because a ceasefire exists on paper. Negotiations between Tehran and Washington have stalled completely. At the same time, the broader conflict is edging dangerously close to dragging the Middle East back into open warfare while extending the worldwide energy disruption already unleashed. Consider the reality. If Iran is prepared to strike a civilian nuclear power facility while ceasefire conditions nominally remain in effect, while 15,000 American personnel are deployed across the region, while 2 carrier strike groups remain offshore, and while the Director General of the IAEA publicly condemns the attack within hours, then what exactly is Tehran reserving for the moment those ceasefire mechanisms formally collapse? What lies beyond a strike on a nuclear facility? There is no reassuring answer to that question. And the fact that American military response structures are already being shaped tells us Washington is asking itself precisely the same thing. The targeting framework is being refined. Combat air dominance packages are moving into position. Carrier decks are loading. This is not the posture of a force willing to wait indefinitely for Tehran to dictate the next move. So this is where the situation stands as of Sunday, the 17th of May, 2026. A drone has struck a nuclear energy installation during an active ceasefire. The International Atomic Energy Agency has publicly condemned the event. The UAE has reserved its right to answer, while declining to officially identify the attacker. Israel and the United States are coordinating over potential renewed offensive operations. CENTCOM has 15,000 personnel and more than 100 aircraft positioned in theater. F-16 CJ platforms are conducting elevated combat air dominance patrols across the Strait of Hormuz. Diplomatic engagement between Washington and Tehran is effectively frozen. Every one of those indicators points toward the same conclusion. The real question is no longer whether this conflict reignites. The question is how the opening sequence of the next phase unfolds, and whether anyone inside the decision chain can halt momentum before events become irreversible. Behind the scenes, the operational picture forming right now is likely far more complex than what is publicly visible. CENTCOM's current posture is only the outer layer. The elevated F-16 CJ missions represent the first ring of a much deeper targeting process. These aircraft are not merely maintaining patrol. They are actively pressuring Iranian radar operators. By entering contested zones, they compel defensive systems to activate. The moment those radars come online, they emit signatures. Those emissions are captured instantly by the RC-135 rivet joint operating at 40,000 foot. Every radar activation is geolocated in real time. Its frequency is identified. Its operational classification is logged. Then it is added directly to the targeting matrix. Iranian operators understand exactly what is happening. Yet they face an impossible choice. Activate and reveal themselves, remain silent and leave critical airspace effectively blind. It is a deliberate targeting trap, and it has been running since the earliest phase of this war. Right now, it is operating with greater intensity than at any moment since the 8th of April ceasefire. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye aboard carrier decks feeds all of this into a live common operating picture distributed across the entire joint force. Every drone launch, every ballistic battery activation, every fast attack craft departing port. All of it is tracked simultaneously. The kill chain from detection to weapons authorization has been compressed into minutes. That is precisely why the Shahed drone that struck Baraka this morning represents a meaningful tactical success for Tehran. It penetrated not because Emirati defenses collapsed. It succeeded because the attack geometry and timing were specifically designed to saturate interception capacity at exactly the right moment. 3 drones crossed from the western border. 2 were destroyed. 1 reached its target. A 67% intercept rate appears impressive on paper. But when the single penetrating drone reaches the Arab world's only nuclear power plant, statistics lose their comfort. That saturation problem will dominate planning discussions in Abu Dhabi, Washington, and Tel Aviv throughout the next 48 hours. And the solution is not simply more interceptor missiles. The answer lies in layered defensive innovation, directed energy systems, high-powered microwave arrays capable of neutralizing multiple drones simultaneously without the enormous cost associated with missile-based interception. Artificial intelligence-driven threat prioritization systems able to make split-second engagement decisions faster than human operators under pressure. Defense firms working in directed energy have advocated these capabilities for years. This conflict has become their proof of concept. When a drone penetrates overlapping THAAD, Patriot, and Israeli Iron Dome defensive coverage to hit a nuclear facility, the debate around deploying high-powered microwave defenses around critical infrastructure ceases to be theoretical. It becomes urgent. But this morning's events do not exist in isolation. They intersect with 2 additional strategic developments that have been reshaping the broader global security environment throughout the past week. During talks with Xi, President Donald Trump reportedly described Taiwan as the most significant issue under discussion. Xi directly warned that Taiwan could become the trigger for military confrontation. Pause and consider that timing. In the same week, a nuclear facility is struck in the Gulf. Washington is simultaneously managing a live conflict with Iran, responding to IAEA condemnation, and conducting high-stakes strategic discussions with Beijing regarding Taiwan. That is an immense strategic burden. Every adversary observing from Tehran, Beijing, and Moscow is drawing its own conclusions regarding how much operational bandwidth Washington truly has. Trump also referenced a pending $14 billion arms package for Taiwan as leverage during those discussions. That detail matters. Using Taiwan arms sales as negotiating currency with China while maintaining a naval blockade of Iran and managing fallout from a nuclear plant strike reveals an administration approaching global pressure points as deeply interconnected. Nothing is isolated. American naval power displayed in the Strait of Hormuz is not only a message to Tehran, it is also a signal to Beijing. The carrier strike groups positioned off Iran's coastline demonstrate what American force concentration looks like when fully committed to a theater. That message is being watched carefully in every capital. Then there's the economic dimension. This conflict has reached a pressure point, still receiving far too little sustained attention. Brent crude has climbed beyond $114 per barrel in May 2026, compared with approximately $71 on the 27th of February, the final day before war began. Insurance risk premiums have surged. Coverage requirements have increased sharply. Some underwriters are refusing voyages through the Strait of Hormuz entirely. Major shipping operators have reduced or suspended transit. This pressure is cumulative. Every additional week, the conflict persists. Every additional week, the strait remains effectively constrained. The consequences ripple outward. Energy markets tighten. Food supply chains strain. Fertilizer shipments face disruption. Manufacturing systems Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.